Hey, my name is Evan. I'm 33. 3 months ago, I was just the maintenance guy who kept his head down and fixed leaky pipes in a quiet townhouse complex. Then, one Tuesday night, I'm standing in my married neighbor's kitchen at 9:40 p.m., rain tapping the windows, and she looks at me with these tired, beautiful eyes and says, "You deserve a little extra reward." The smell of peppermint hand soap was still on my hands when she handed me that vinyl record, and I knew everything was about to change. She was 42, elegant, completely off limits, and when our knees touched under that kitchen island, I felt more awake than I had in years. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments, because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. The rain started at 9:30 that Tuesday night, and I was standing in Margot Lane's kitchen with my hands under her sink, trying not to think about how her house smelled like peppermint and something expensive I couldn't name. The water was shut off. The faucet hung silent above me, but the rain kept tapping against her window like fingers on glass, and somewhere behind me, her refrigerator hummed a low, steady note that made everything feel close. "If Daniel walks in," I whispered, "I'll just say something about the gasket being loose." She was sitting at the kitchen island, still in her work clothes, some kind of soft gray sweater that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her linen scarf was draped over the chair next to her, and I could see the porch light glowing through the back window, casting everything in this warm, golden haze. "He won't," she said quietly. "He's at that conference call until 11. I tightened the P-trap with my wrench, feeling the old metal give way just enough to stop the leak. It was a temporary fix. The whole thing needed replacing, but it would hold for now. The peppermint smell was stronger under the sink. Hand soap, I realized. The good kind that comes in those glass bottles. A car passed somewhere outside, headlights sweeping across the kitchen wall. We both went still for a second, listening. But it kept going. Just someone getting dropped off by rideshare. "There," I said, sliding out from under the cabinet. "That'll stop the dripping for tonight, but I'll need to come back tomorrow with a new trap." She nodded, watching me pack my tools. The quiet stretched between us, filled only by the rain and that steady hum from the fridge. Then, we heard it. One last drop from the faucet, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat. We both held our breath, waiting for another. It never came. I closed my toolbox and headed for the side door. "I'll be back tomorrow afternoon, with the right parts this time." The rain hit my face as I stepped into her yard, and I could feel her watching me from the window as I made my way to the side gate. My hands were shaking a little as I fumbled with the latch, but whether that was from the cold or from something else entirely, I didn't want to think about it. The next morning, I sat at my desk with invoices spread in front of me and my mother's old record spinning on the turntable. Some jazz album she used to play on Sunday mornings. The vinyl crackled before each song started, the way old records do when they've been loved too much. My phone buzzed. Text from Mr. Benton. "Unit 14B reported leak. Handle it discreetly." I typed back. "Already on it. Fixed temporarily last night. Need new parts." Another buzz, this time from my sister Nadia. "Hey, can you front me 1200 by the 15th? I'll pay you back next month, I promise." I stared at the message for a long moment. 1200 was doable, but only if my rent discount stayed intact, and that depended on keeping Mr. Benton happy, keeping things quiet, no complaints, no drama, no stories. "Yeah," I typed back, "should be fine." Outside my window, the shared green was still wet from last night's rain. I could see Ruth Delgado setting up a small table by the mailboxes, probably some HOA thing. She waved when she spotted me in the window. Then my phone buzzed again. "Ruth, this time. Garden party at 14B next week. Margot's hosting some clients. Isn't she lovely?" I set the phone down without responding, and went to get the replacement P-trap from my supply closet. At 12:20, Margot opened her front door wearing jeans and a white t-shirt that somehow looked more expensive than most people's formal wear. Her kitchen was spotless, fresh basil in a small pot on the counter, everything gleaming under the afternoon light. "Daniel's at lunch," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Won't be back until 3. I nodded and got to work, sliding under the sink with my new tools. The cabinet smelled like cleaning supplies and that same peppermint soap. "The thing about these old pipes," I said, working the wrench around the fitting, "is they look fine from the outside, but the threads get worn down over time. Everything seems solid until one day it just gives." "I prefer to handle these things while he's out," she said after a moment. "Daniel gets particular about household maintenance appearing in our email threads." I understood. The HOA sent automatic notifications for every service call. Some people liked the paper trail. Others preferred discretion. The new trap fitted perfectly. I ran the water, tested the pressure, checked every joint for leaks. Nothing. Silence. "That should hold for years," I said, wiping down the inside of the cabinet with a clean rag. When I slid out, Margot was standing by the island, holding something wrapped in parchment paper. "You deserve a little extra reward," she said. I froze. Outside, a shadow passed the front window. Someone walking by on the sidewalk. Just a delivery guy with a package, moving on to the next house. I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "That's really not necessary," I said, but she was already unwrapping it. A vinyl record, the same album I'd been playing that morning. Same artist anyway, different record. "I got 2 copies from a client's marketing campaign," she said. "Promotional things. And this morning when you drove past with your windows down, I heard the music. It sounded like Sunday." She'd written a note on small cardstock tucked inside the sleeve. I listened. It sounded like Sunday. "I thought you might like it," she said. I stared at the record, then at her. "Thank you. That's... How did you know?" "Windows down, music up. You looked happy." She placed the record on her own turntable. Some expensive-looking thing that probably cost more than my car. The needle found the groove, and that familiar crackle filled the room. We sat at the island with warm ceramic mugs, coffee for me, tea for her. The music played soft and low, and somehow our knees ended up almost touching under the counter. Neither of us spoke. We just sat there, watching the record spin, listening to my mother's favorite song in a kitchen that smelled like basil and peppermint, and something I was starting to recognize as just her. "Thank you," I said finally. "That's all," she said. But neither of us stood up. The doorbell rang at 1:10, sharp and sudden. "Ruth," Margot whispered, and I was already moving toward the pantry, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled the door closed behind me and counted my breaths in the dark. 1, 2, 3. The pantry smelled like coffee beans and vanilla, and I could hear every word through the thin door. "Hi, sweetie," Ruth's voice bright and friendly. "Just dropping off the garden party flyers. I saw your light flicker earlier. Everything okay?" "Oh, that." Margot's voice was perfectly calm. "Old wiring. Everything's fine now. Well, these are for you and Daniel. The response has been wonderful. Everyone's so excited to see your client work." "Thank you. I'll make sure Daniel sees this." A pause. Then Ruth again. "You know, I think I saw Evan's truck earlier. Such a nice young man. Always so helpful with the little maintenance things." My chest tightened. "Mr. Benton sent him for the kitchen sink," Margot said. "Small leak. All sorted now." "Perfect. Well, I'll let you get back to your afternoon." The door closed. Footsteps. Then silence. I waited 10 more heartbeats before stepping out of the pantry. Margot was standing by the island, her hands shaking just slightly. "I should go," I said. She nodded. Would you Could you email Mr. Benton? The receipt, I mean, so it looks routine. Of course. I packed my tools quickly, my hands steadier than hers now. At the back door, I paused. I'll use the side gate, I said. The porch light buzzed softly overhead as I made my way around her house. Somewhere behind me, the record was still playing. At 3:20 that afternoon, I sent Mr. Benton the receipt with a brief note: Unit 14B sink repair complete. No further issues. When I got back to my place, there was a small paper bag by my door. Inside, a loaf of fresh bread and the note from the vinyl, folded carefully. For when the day feels longer than it is. M. I set the record on my own turntable and lowered the needle. The first song started just as my phone pinged with a text from Nadia confirming her repayment schedule. Everything was ordinary, everything was normal, except for the bread plate sitting by my keys and the way I kept touching the folded note in my pocket, and the fact that I already knew I'd be returning that plate tomorrow morning. Some lines, once crossed, change the shape of everything that comes after. I knocked on Margot's door at 9:05 the next morning, holding her empty bread plate like it was evidence of something. She opened the door in workout clothes, yoga pants, and a loose gray top, her hair pulled back. She looked younger like this, more real. Thank you for the bread, I said. Come in, I want to show you something. She led me to the utility closet by the kitchen. Small space, pipes and valves and electrical boxes lined up like soldiers. The water's shut off, she said. I should know where it is. I showed her the main valve, how to turn it clockwise to stop the flow. Our fingers brushed as I guided her hand to the handle, and we both stepped back like we'd touched something hot. There's a flashlight on the shelf, I said, pointing, in case you need it. We walked out to her balcony. She had plants out there, herbs in small pots, a few flowers that caught the morning sun. Basil, she said, touching one of the leaves. I grow it for cooking. It smells good. Take some when you go. We stood by the railing, looking out over the shared green. Ruth was walking her small dog by the mailboxes. Mr. Benton was checking something on his clipboard. If you need help, Margot said quietly, with anything urgent, you could flick the porch light, twice, at dusk. I stared at her. That's not just for emergencies. Margot, I know what this is, she said. I know what it isn't, but if something breaks and Daniel's here, the light, twice, I'll find an excuse. On my way out, I passed the hallway that led to their bedroom. Family photos on the walls, Margot and Daniel at some beach, at some restaurant, smiling for the camera. Him in a suit, her in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I left quickly, my heart beating too loud in my chest. At 7:42 that evening, I stood at my kitchen window and watched the shared green settle into darkness. One by one, the porch lights came on. Then I saw it. The light at 14B flickered once. Twice, I grabbed my level and a few other tools, enough to look legitimate, and walked across the green. Margot opened the door before I could knock. Picture frame in the living room, she said. Keep sliding crooked. It was a small thing. 5 minutes with the level, a tiny adjustment to the hanging wire. But we took our time with it, her standing close enough that I could smell her shampoo while I worked. My clients come here sometimes, she said, for meetings. Everything has to look perfect. But this is where you live. Sometimes I forget the difference. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. Rain started again outside, soft against the windows. Do you ever... She started, then stopped. Do you ever feel like you're living in someone else's house? I looked around the living room, everything expensive, everything coordinated, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. Every day, I said. I was packing up my tools when the pipe burst. Not the sink this time, the supply line under the cabinet, The one we hadn't touched just gave way all at once, sending water everywhere. Shut off, I said, and we both moved toward the utility closet. The hallway was narrow. I slipped on the wet tile and started to fall backward, and Margot reached out to steady me, her hand finding my arm, her other hand somehow ending up against my forehead. For maybe 3 seconds we stood like that, her palm cool against my skin, my heart hammering so hard I was sure she could feel it. Then the water pressure dropped as she found the valve, and we stepped apart like we'd been shocked. I should. I gestured toward the mess in the kitchen. Yes? But neither of us moved. Outside, the rain was getting heavier. Inside, the only sound was the drip of water from the broken pipe and the quiet rush of our breathing. I wiped a scrape on my forearm with a dish towel and headed for the door. Evan, I turned back. Thank you. I walked home through the rain, my tool bag heavy in one hand, the taste of something unspoken still on my tongue. 5 minutes later, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a clean towel pressed to the scrape on my arm, listening to the rain and trying not to think about the way her hand had felt against my forehead. I pulled out a piece of paper and started writing an estimate for a proper line replacement. Professional language, clear timelines, everything business. But my handwriting looked shaky, and I kept hearing that refrigerator hum and the soft way she'd said my name. I set the pen down and looked out my window. The porch light at 14B was dark now, just darkness and rain and the distance between my kitchen and hers. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I'd fix the line and keep everything strictly professional. Tomorrow I'd stop noticing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. Tomorrow. I placed my tools by the front door for morning and tried to convince myself that simple repairs could stay simple, that some lines didn't have to be crossed just because they were there. But I was already thinking about the way her voice had sounded when she said, "Thank you," and I knew I was lying to myself. Some things, once they start, have their own momentum. The rain kept falling, and I kept listening. The next morning, I showed up at Margot's door at 10 sharp with a new braided supply line and a promise to myself that I'd keep this professional. She answered in dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. The kitchen was bright with morning sun, everything clean and composed like the night before had never happened. Just the line replacement, I said, setting my toolbox on the counter. Of course. We were careful with our words, careful with our distance. I worked under the sink while she sat at the island, and we talked about safe things, the weather, the HOA newsletter, whether the shared green needed new landscaping. When I tested the water pressure, everything held perfectly. Clean, tight connections. No drips, no leaks, no emergency calls in the middle of the night. Thank you, she said when I finished. That's all. I nodded and packed my tools. Professional, distant, exactly what we both needed. At the threshold, she said, "Evan." I turned. "I'm married." "I know." The words hung between us for a moment, honest and final. Then I walked back across the green, gripping the stair rail to my apartment a little too tight, feeling that familiar ache settle somewhere behind my ribs. That afternoon at 3:30, I found a small paper bag by my door. Fresh basil, still damp from her garden, wrapped in a cloth napkin, a note folded underneath, "For your pasta." I cooked that night with the basil she'd grown, played the vinyl she'd given me, and tried not to look out my window toward 14B. But when dusk came, I found myself at the glass anyway, watching the shared green settle into darkness. From her balcony, I could see her silhouette through the sliding door. She was wearing that linen scarf, the one that had been draped over the kitchen chair that first night. The light caught it just right, and for a moment, it looked like she was floating. Then, the porch light at 14B flickered twice. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the door handle. Everything in me wanted to walk across that green, to see what kind of emergency she needed help with, to hear her voice say my name in that soft way. Instead, I stepped back from the window and wrote on a small card, "I won't make this harder." I kept the card in my desk drawer and tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. Saturday morning brought the HOA garden party setup. I watched from my window as Ruth marshaled volunteers with folding chairs and string lights, turning the shared green into something that looked like a magazine photo. Around 11, Mr. Benton knocked on my door. "Margot's balcony door is sticking," he said. "Mind taking a look? She's hosting clients tonight, wants everything perfect." I should have said no, should have suggested another handyman, claimed I was busy, found any excuse. Instead, I grabbed my tools. Margot let me in through the kitchen while volunteers bustled around below. Daniel was in his office on a conference call. I could hear his voice through the closed door, all business and authority. The balcony door just needed the hinge pins cleaned and oiled. Simple fix. But while I worked, Margot moved around the kitchen, and at some point she set a warm mug of coffee on the counter near my elbow. We didn't speak. She answered emails on her phone. I tightened screws and tested the door's swing. Ordinary, professional. But when I reached for the coffee, our fingers brushed against the ceramic and that touch sent electricity straight up my arm. I finished the repair and left the mug on the island, still half full. As I packed my tools, Daniel's car turned into the lane. "Side path," Margot said quietly. I slipped out through her garden gate, my heart hammering as I heard Daniel's keys in the front door lock. Made it to the mailboxes just as he opened the door, close enough to hear him call, "Honey, I'm home." That afternoon, Ruth cornered me by the mailboxes with a too bright smile. "Daniel installed one of those new doorbell cameras," she said. "Isn't technology amazing? He can see everyone who comes and goes, even when he's at work." I smiled back and nodded, but inside, something cold settled in my stomach. "Great work at 14B," came a text from Mr. Benton an hour later. "Daniel appreciates the discretion." I stared at that word, discretion, and wondered what exactly Daniel knew, what he'd seen, what he suspected. That evening, I found myself Googling the camera model Ruth had mentioned, reading about motion detection zones and cloud storage, trying to figure out what angles it covered. Then I closed the browser, disgusted with myself. This was madness. The garden party started at 7. I had no reason to be there, but Mr. Benton had asked me to check the outdoor electrical outlets, so I hovered at the edge of the gathering with my voltage tester, officially working. Margot moved through the crowd in a blue dress that caught the string lights, playing the perfect hostess. Her clients, advertising people from what I could overhear, clustered around her with wine glasses and business cards. Daniel worked the crowd too, all charm and confidence. At one point, I heard him joke with a client about water bills and handymen practically camping at our house lately. Everyone laughed. Margot's smile never wavered, but I caught the way her hand tightened around her wine glass. I finished checking the outlets and started to leave, but as I reached my door, the porch light at 14B flickered twice. Then, once more. A third flicker. That was new. We'd never talked about a third signal. I stood there for a moment, key in my lock, watching the party wind down below. Then I went inside and closed the door behind me. Some invitations are too dangerous to answer. The next evening, my HOA app pinged with a message from Margot. "Valve handle in utility closet feels stiff. Can you take a look when convenient?" Official tone, proper channels, everything documented. I timed it for when Daniel was on his evening run, 7:18, according to the schedule I'd started unconsciously memorizing. The valve handle turned fine, but I cleaned the threads and added a drop of oil anyway. "Thank you," Margot said from the kitchen doorway. "Just routine maintenance." But as I packed my tools, the doorbell chimed. That new camera, sending an alert to Daniel's phone. Through the front window, I could see him jogging up the path earlier than usual. Back gate, I said, but the latch was rusted solid. I forced it, metal scraping against metal, the sound too loud in the quiet evening. It gave way, just as I heard Daniel's key in the front lock. I slipped through the gap and into the alley. My forearm scraped worse than before, heart pounding as I made my way home the long way around. The next morning brought steady sun, and in silence that felt different somehow. Heavier. I looked for the vinyl record Margot had given me and realized I'd left it on her kitchen counter during yesterday's rush. It never came back. I wrote 3 different notes: apologies, explanations, promises to stay away, and tore up all of them. That evening, the porch light at 14B never flickered. Nadia called during dinner. "The loan," she said. "I need it by Friday. Is that still okay?" "I'll figure it out," I said, but I was thinking about my rent discount, about Mr. Benton's texts, about the word discretion, and all the ways I might have already blown everything. That night, I put my unsigned note under the salt shaker on my kitchen table, a reminder of all the things I shouldn't say, shouldn't do, shouldn't want. Monday brought 2 service calls across town, and I threw myself into the work. Broken garbage disposal, faulty light switch, problems with clear solutions. But my hands worked while my head stayed stuck at 14B, replaying conversations, wondering what Margot was thinking, whether she regretted everything. Ruth found me when I got back that evening. "Daniel asked for your rate sheet," she said, that smile still too bright. "You're getting quite popular around here." It sounded like a compliment with teeth. That night at dusk, I took my trash out exactly when 14B's front blinds opened a sliver. But I kept walking, eyes straight ahead, and after a moment the blinds closed again. No light flickered that night either. Tuesday morning, I wrote one final note. "I made this worse. I'm sorry. I'll stay away." E. I slipped it under Margot's doormat at 7:58 when the dog walkers were out and it looked like routine maintenance business. Then, I went home and worked the rest of the day without music, without looking out my window, without checking my phone. That evening at 10:12, I found my note on my own doormat. Folded once, no writing added. I took that as an answer. For 2 days, I kept to other units in the complex. Fixed Mrs. Chen's bathroom fan, replaced weather stripping for the couple in 9A, helped an elderly man with his stuck sliding door. I didn't see Margot, didn't hear from her. The porch light at 14B stayed dark and steady. Wednesday evening, Nadia came by to pick up the check I'd promised her. "What's that music?" she asked, tilting her head toward the wall. I listened. The vinyl, the one Margot had given me, was playing softly from the next unit over. "I don't know," I said, but I did know. Mr. Benton found me in the mailroom 20 minutes later, holding a familiar album sleeve. "This was held for you," he said. "Anonymous drop." I took the record without opening it. Back in my kitchen, I set it on the turntable but didn't lower the needle. Just watched it spin, silent and untouched. Thursday afternoon, Ruth appeared by the hedges that separated our units. "Be careful, dear," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Husband's asking for names. Keep your head down." I thanked her and decided to take work off-site for a few days. Declined 3 jobs in the complex. Told Mr. Benton I had commitments across town. That night, I messaged Nadia that the loan was safe. I'd sell my old computer monitor if I had to. I fell asleep at the kitchen table with a pen still in my hand, the porch light outside my window dark and quiet. At 2:03 in the morning, I woke to a soft glow bouncing against my ceiling. I stumbled to the window. The porch light at 14B was flickering, 2 quick pulses, then one long one, our old code with something new added. I pulled on a hoodie and walked across the green, counting to 50 between steps so I didn't look like I was running. Margot was sitting on her front porch, bundled in that linen scarf, a steaming mug in her hands. I pulled away because I liked it too much, she said without looking at me. I sat on the steps, careful to keep distance between us. I'm sorry about the panic, I said. The rushing around. I never meant. I know. We sat in the quiet for a moment. The complex was asleep around us, porch lights glowing like distant stars. I don't know what this is, she said finally. Neither do I. But I know what it can't be. Yeah? She pulled my folded note from her pocket, the one I'd left under her mat. But now there was a word written in her handwriting on the inside. Heard. No texts, she said. No jokes, no promises, just when the house gets too quiet. When Daniel's on a call and I'm sitting in that kitchen, listening to the fridge hum, maybe you could fix something small, Margot, and maybe we could have tea. And maybe that's enough. She stood and handed me the note. Some doors don't need to swing all the way open, she said. Then she went inside, and I walked home with her word in my pocket. The next morning, Daniel caught me by the mailboxes. Thanks for all the sync work, he said, his smile measured and careful. Margot mentioned you've been very helpful. Anytime you log a ticket with Mr. Benton, I replied. Margot came down the path with a client folder in her hands, eyes on the pages, not on me, professional, distant, perfect. But later, through her kitchen window, I saw the vinyl sleeve sitting on the island like a houseplant, present but unspoken. That evening at 6:48, dusk settled over the complex like a soft blanket. I was tightening a loose hinge on Margot's balcony door while Daniel took a call in his office. We said almost nothing. She handed me a screwdriver when I needed it. I showed her how to oil the pins herself next time. The faucet didn't drip anymore. That steady metronome had been replaced by something quieter, more careful, but somehow more real. When I finished, I stepped onto the shared green and looked back at 14B. The porch light pulsed once, not a summons, not a signal, just acknowledgement. Some doors don't swing open, they stay cracked just enough to let the air in, and sometimes, on the nights when the house gets too quiet and the kitchen hums its lonely song, that's exactly enough.